So thank you all very much for coming back. I'd just like to make my own personal comment. I was just saying to a few people that I feel in this conference that we've made a real step change with SFIA. This conference and the parts that I've just heard, what we heard the speaker this morning, we're now talking almost predominantly about how people have taken SFIA and adopted it, implemented it. I've heard the phrase, which I've used a lot, keep it simple. I've heard phrases around, you've got to engage with people, you've got to engage with the business, you've got to communicate. So I think that we've really made a step change now because we are talking about lots of organizations that are taking SFIA, which is underpinning what they actually want to do and making it real. So I could envisage that by this time next year, we'll have a dozen different models for implementation, all taking advantage of one common language, SFIA, and having tremendous success with different organizations. So I've been really, really encouraged. I was just talking to Mike, who's up speaking next, that this was kind of the vision 5 years ago, that SFIA would remain constrained by just providing the language, and that other organizations, companies would pick that up, use it, build tool sets, build processes, build business offerings around SFIA, and it's starting to happen. So one of the challenges for the foundation now, which we're discussing, is so where does it go next? And I think each of the speakers today and each of the organizations here has a real key role in defining where SFIA goes and how we keep that relevance to the marketplace. Because if we don't, it won't actually enable us to make the business changes that we want. So as I said, thank you very much for your attention today. Last plea, please can you fill in the satisfaction surveys with each of the speakers. That really is helpful to understand what worked, what didn't work quite so well, so that next year's conference, if you have suggestions for the type of conference that you would like for next year, they would be very gratefully received. Just before I hand over to Mike, I'd like to offer my personal thanks to the people who have been behind the scenes trying making me stand in the right place, but have provided all of the support structure around this conference. So I'd like, please, if you could give them a round of applause, because I think they've made it work very well. Finally, we have 2 speakers and then a plug for Pete Leather's session, which is starting after the plenary, which is aimed at certified SFIA consultants, and is really an opportunity, as hopefully lots of people are here, to get together, just discuss between themselves how it's working and how it's not, and Pete will be running that session right at the end. So I'd like to hand over, I will finish now, but I'd like to hand over to Mike Chad to talk about where SFIA is going next with the developments, which I'm really looking forward to, and then we will finish with Ben Casey giving us the closing address and finishing the conference for today. So Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Alan, and thanks to everybody for staying. I had visions, being the virtually last speaker, talking to an empty room, but not at all, so thank you. Right, Beyond version 5, or SFIA's Future Development, that was the title I was given. And in fact, as Alan has just been saying, it seems a very appropriate way to round things off after hearing all the good things that have been done with SFIA. And bearing in mind that we want to keep it up to date, we want to keep it alive and dynamic and relevant. Where it began in a little bit of history, around about 2000. I'm even now a bit vague as to exactly when it was released, but SFIA first came into being as a result of a government initiative, because there was perceived to be a need for identifying what IT skills we needed, because there was allegedly a shortage, and so money was put up to create this framework, this database of skills. And the government obviously had an input into that. It was recognized fairly quickly that there had already been done some earlier work in this area. And in fact, I remember the very first time I saw a skills framework, which was the BCS's ISM, way back at the end of the 1980s. And I remember exactly where I was, whose office I was in. It was an HR manager of a large insurance company. He produced this fairly slim folder, and he said, look what we've got. The BCS are doing this. They've tried to define what a programmer does and what a systems analyst does and things like that. And I thought that was rather interesting. And it grew from there. And of course, that was one of the inputs to SFIA. We also had input from across the industry. There was widespread consultation. involving everybody who knew about IT from its various implementations in various ways, across the public sector, across the academic sector, and of course the people who are involved in training and developing IT people as they were at that time. So a lot of thought, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of good practice went into the first implementation of SFIA. And it then suddenly occurred to somebody that, yes, this is great, and we're very pleased with what we've got, but in fact, our industry does change, and it changes rapidly, and there's probably nothing that moves faster than IT. And so we better find a way to keep it up to date, which is what brought the SFIA Foundation into being, when a number of organizations took it on board to work together to, on a non-profit basis, to maintain SFIA and to develop it and promote it as what became a standard. So we had version 2, I think around about 2002, version 3, 2005, version 4, and then 4G, around about 2008, 2009, and then it only seems a short time ago, but in fact it was the end of 2011 when we brought out version 5. And for my sins, I've been involved in all of these as they've come through. Those of you who've been coming here for years may recall seeing me standing up here before explaining to you what has gone into this latest version. Where are we now? Well, we do, I think I very much agree with what Alan said about it's almost like a step change from having to explain to people what SFIA is and what it's for. We now have a situation where a lot of people recognize it, are using it, are comfortable with it, and find it a very valuable resource. And it's pretty well established now across IT. Okay, not everybody knows about it, but anybody in a large organization, certainly anybody in the government sector, will have heard of SFIA or will have been influenced by it if they work in IT. I suppose I'm slightly biased, but I do firmly believe that it's a distillation of good practice. And knowing how the evolution has gone, the way we put it together, the consultation we did, how we sought ideas, we tried to validate those ideas, ultimately came up with updates and revisions. I think it's fair to say that it is a distillation of good practice because it comes from people at the sharp end using these skills. It's become a benchmark as well in many ways, and we've heard some of them today. I won't elaborate too much, but people do measure themselves against SFIA more and more, and particularly the generic level structure, as if nothing else, provides a mechanism for people to make judgments and comparisons. It's become more and more visible. As I say, I go around and visit a lot of organizations, and more I do see them using SFIA and being aware of it and respecting it. It's a respected framework. Again, perhaps I lead a sheltered life, but I don't hear much criticism or anybody saying, well, it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that. It is pretty widely respected. It's also global. Okay, that seems a big claim to make, but I know that it is used on all 5 continents. Not in every country, of course, but increasingly it is spreading its use across many different types of organizations across the world. And of course it's translated into a number of languages as well. And it's credible because it works. Well, it doesn't work by itself. In its implementations in various ways, as we've heard today, it works. It produces very valuable results for many organizations as they move forward. The challenge, I suppose, is of thinking that it is mature and it does everything it needs to do and it meets everybody's requirements. And of course, as I said at the start, IT moves forward, it's constantly changing, developing and evolving. So we need to be a little bit cautious of thinking that it's mature. We need to be prepared to listen to those who say there's something missing or something has changed, something could be better described, restructured in some way, something could be taken out of SFIA because it's no longer relevant. And that's really what we're about in this little session, talking about how we move forward on that. There are a number of issues related to the future development of SFIA. Up till now, as I've said, we've been relying on a consultation process every 3 years or thereabouts, where we invite comment, we invite suggestions, we invite people to tell us what they think could be done better, and we respond as best we can. But so we have the issue of currency. 3 years is quite a long life cycle nowadays. There are things probably happening immediately after the release of version 5 which are not fully taken account of. and we need to find out what they are and do something about it. Things like the cloud probably was around when we did version 5. We didn't get much in the way of input there which suggested anything was different. Of course, this is one of the challenges as well. We get fashions, we got new terminology, we got different plays on words meaning the same things. And it was quite interesting. I was checking my phone at lunchtime and I got a little message from LinkedIn. Some of you may have got it as well, but I didn't read the article, but the heading was, "The Story of the Way Big Data Helped Shape World War II." And I thought, does anything ever change? Is there anything new? So, okay, are there new skills involved with the cloud, with digitalization, with big data, or are they simply different terms to express the same thing? And even if they are the same thing, should we be changing the terminology within SFIA to reflect them and keep it up to date? Because we want it to be up to date, but we want to try and avoid fashions which will pass very quickly as well. All of that leads towards sustaining the credibility of SFIA and the perceived authority of what's in there. We do feel that it's good practice, and we think that's generally recognized and a fair claim to make. But we need to keep it that way, so we need to be constantly reviewing it. One thing we haven't really had, because of the nature of how we've done the updates, is proper traceability as to where changes have come from. We've had perfectly valid suggestions and from very good sources, as I know because I've been involved in it, but we didn't have the mechanism or the time, really, the resourcing, to properly record them and record a trace back to who came up with it, how we discussed it, how we decided what we were going to do. We simply asked you to accept that after due consultation, this change was going to be embedded in SFIA, and we hope you like it, but not much you can do if you don't. So we need to think about that. Another thing which has been a little bit fuzzy, if you like, is that we've had suggestions coming forward saying, we would like to see this in SFIA, we'd like to see that. We think this wording should be changed. And we've looked at it, and we've reviewed it and consulted others, and we've changed it or not, as the case may be. What we haven't done is really separate a clearly stated requirement for change from the actual solution to that change. And this is something that we would like to do a bit more clearly. So, how are we going to do it? We have a number of entities, and this again is about the future of SFIA. SFIA itself is a resource. It's a database. It's passive. It doesn't do anything. It's got a lot of very good stuff in there, as we've seen, but it needs something to bring it to life. And at the moment, the organization which owns it, the SFIA Foundation, is driven by a board, a SFIA Foundation board, and we also have a SFIA Council, which has recently expanded in size and taken on some new people, some from other countries as well as other organizations, who want to have a role in the future development and keeping fresh. So the proposal is not implemented yet, but the intention is that the SFIA Foundation Board will set up a separate subsidiary board, which we're currently calling the SFIA Development Board, and that in itself will interface with the Council, which we expect and hope will give us plenty of context, plenty of opinion about the future direction of where SFIA should go as a resource. The funding and the overall strategy will still have to come from the Foundation Board, which represents those who provide the support and the funding, the 5 organizations which own SFIA. The Development Board then will provide direction as to what's going to happen, hopefully fairly dynamically. And there needs to be then a small editorial team doing the sort of things that I've done in the past to respond to requirements and to try to derive solutions which are going to meet those requirements. In the meantime, there's, as ever, the need to continue communicating with the SFIA community, and SFIA Operations is the entity which has always done that and will continue to do that. But we then hope that the requirements coming from the user community, people who are actually getting their hands dirty with using SFIA in all sorts of different ways, will start to come along and say, we need it to do this, or we need it to contain something else. That will come to the editorial team and will be recorded in such a way that we can look at it, and whoever's interested can have a look at it and see what's being asked for. And that, in turn, hopefully will stimulate thinking for further improvements. And it's not very dissimilar from what we've done in the past with our updates, except that the plan here, or the vision, is that it will be an ongoing database, which will be there continuously, and we'll dip into it as and when required. We will then look to people who know about the specialist areas to give us solutions to those requirements, and perhaps a second independent trusted source, as we're calling them, to give us a validation of that solution. So again, that will be traceable, and we'll be able to see what was suggested, what the solution was that was proposed, how we discussed it, and what was finally agreed. Clearly, there will be a close link with the SFIA Council in this area. And finally, there may be ideas coming in from outside, and the editorial team may proactively research, go down certain paths to see what we need to take account of to add to the future. So it looks a complicated diagram, but hopefully by building it up gradually, it's made some sense. Who are the trusted sources going to be? Well, we need to find out. There's lots of organizations, very well respected, providing accreditations, providing possibly other frameworks, expertise in different areas, providing training development, who are recognized as leading in their particular field. I wouldn't suggest that there's anybody who covers the complete spectrum of SFIA, but there will be people who specialize in things like architecture and software and service management and other things like this, where we can identify them as the people to talk to if we want solutions to the requirements. So we'll need to do some research, engage with appropriate stakeholders in those areas, identify potential experts, and to build a dialogue with them so that we can create a network, if you like, where we can quickly respond to the need for new requirements and perhaps make SFIA a little bit more dynamic rather than having something which is updated every 3 years. And the dialogue would include validating the credibility of suggested solutions. So essentially, to keep it fairly brief, the change process is probably going to look something like this. The user community will have a change requirement which will be reported to the editorial team. It will be assessed. It will be assigned an author and a reviewer, and a solution will be prepared. It will then be validated, reviewed, signed off, and eventually published. Exactly the sequence of how that will be done is still to be worked out in detail, but essentially there will be a requirements database, as I suggested in the last slide, and then an agreed program of updates to SFIA, which will have to be carefully managed and carefully communicated so that it doesn't result in confusion if we're changing things more quickly than we've done in the past. So the requirements database needs to be visible so that people can see what's happening, which means it needs to be accessible as well. The functionality is still to be worked out and developed and defined and implemented, but that's a task which will be hopefully started fairly soon. And of course, part of the communication is to promote the idea of how we want it to work. So, in summary, really, where we're going is we want to establish requirements for change before we define solutions, which is arguably what we've done before, but it hasn't been visible in that way. It'll be slightly more rigorous, but hopefully it's going to be at the same time an agile approach to requirements, because we want to speed things up. We want them to be responsive. It will engage partners, other skills groups, forums who are specialists in particular areas. Any interested party will be able to submit comment at any point, and we will actively involve recognized experts insofar as we can persuade them to be involved. We hope then this will encourage even further buy-in from communities of particular specialisms, so that more and more people are recognizing SFIA as the central point where all the skills information is retained and available. And that in turn will add to the globalization of SFIA, seeing it used in more and more places, more and more countries and organizations. And coming back down to earth, it will hopefully provide some revenue to the SFIA Foundation to enable further investment and continued evolution of SFIA. And that essentially, in a nutshell, is how we're going to approach the future of SFIA. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mike. So I'm just briefly going to wrap up for us. I will be brief, I assure you. Firstly, on behalf of the Foundation Board, I'd just like to thank you for coming to this year's conference. I hope you'll agree it's been worth waiting the 2 years for. I also think we've had a fantastic set of speakers and new applications here this year. A conference lives or dies by the quality and the ability of the speakers to get across the things they're trying to impart on the subject matter. And this year I think has been one of our best years as far as speakers and content have been concerned. And I agree with Alan and Mike that we have seen a shift in the way in which we've been viewing SFIA, and that's very nice from the Foundation Board's perspective to see. Some of you may be aware that SFIA is run as a very lean organisation, and we deliver what is essentially a global, I say we, I'm using the royal we there, essentially a global product that punches above its weight. And this conference is our major promotional tool, our biggest single thing that we do. And it's thanks largely to two individuals that we're here today and that it's run so well and the content is so good. So I'd like to thank both Ron and Lucy for their extreme hard work in putting this together. It's been a fantastic day, so many thanks to you.
Can I just say, you should have said Lucy and Ron, really. Lucy's done all the things.
Thank you, Ron. As SFIA continues to grow internationally, it needs to focus on what its global ambitions are and look to see what it needs to do over the next 3 years. Mike's talked about how we develop SFIA as a product, and the board's looking at a 3-year strategy going forward. And as those plans start to get crystallised, then they'll start to be shared to the wider SFIA community so that we can make the most of the community that we have around SFIA. I'd also like to take the opportunity while I'm here to thank the council, if I can get that out. Mike talked about them briefly in his presentation, but there's a group of very interested users of the framework within the council. They come from a myriad of different organisations, from global users of SFIA to training and consultancy organisations, to organisations using SFIA in software, in the recruitment process, or in many other different ways. And they have a very important dialogue with both the board and the wider community. So I'd like to thank them for their input, but individually I'd like to thank Andy and Peter for their dedication to the council itself. We have a steady flow of new partners and consultants working with the Foundation and with SFIA itself, and the general interest continues to grow. Notably in the recent past we've seen some growth in the Asia-Pac region, in China and Hong Kong, Malaysia and India, and we still see a number of other countries beginning to demonstrate an interest in using SFIA going forward, so growth internationally is looking good. We also continue to see the level of interest from other standards bodies being strong. People like ISACA, APMG and IEEE and organisations in Australia, along with our existing Foundation partners and board members that continue to make the growth of SFIA very relevant in the international community. So overall, I think SFIA is doing fairly well. But it is a lean organisation and it does need to continue to work very hard, and it does need to not be complacent and look to the future. Lastly, before I sign off today, I've got two final thanks to say. Firstly, one person's been at the heart of SFIA since its inception, as Mike said, since around 2000, although we're not sure of the date at the moment. He was involved with the creation of it and is our current operations manager. Some people know him as Mr. SFIA, but his real name's Ron McLaren. Ron's helped SFIA through every part of its life so far. And on behalf of the board, and hopefully on behalf of the wider community, I'd like to thank him publicly for his help so far and the work that he's done to make SFIA what it is. I'd like to embarrass him by getting him up to give him something as well to thank him for those. So if I can ask you to give Ron a big hand. You can go. Thank you, Ron. It is just a small token of our thanks. And the other part of the McLaren support team for SFIA, Mrs. McLaren, we feel, has had to put up with us and yourself for all these years. So there is some flowers, I'll hasten to add, winging their way to her to say thank you to her as well for her thanks. Lastly, and probably most importantly, I'd like to thank yourselves, the users of SFIA, because without you, it doesn't work. Without the work that you've done in using SFIA and using it in anger out there in the real world, it doesn't get to where it is today. So finally, thank you. Safe journey, have a good 2013, and I'll see you back here next year. Thank you.